That looks good.
Okay. So what I did is I hardwired it into my computer. So it's running on USB instead of Wi-Fi. So it should not do what it did the other day on us. And then I'm wondering if I don't have like my image up there, if that will just put more, like if it was straining between the two and making that. So I thought we'd try this today and see how this goes. But I can put this up here. So if you want to do kind of like a similar sketch to this.
Okay.
And I just noticed. And it can be, you know, super loose. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, kind of while we have a couple minutes and we're waiting for Susan, and I see Cheryl down there too. Hey, Cheryl. What style of painting do you all enjoy? I mean, do you like more realistic? Do you like expressionistic painting? I mean, what are kind of some of your styles? What do you like?
Well, I like realistic, but I also like it loose.
Cool. A combination. So kind of, I call that almost like stylized, like it's based on reality. You can tell what it is. It's not abstract, but there's expression there. It's not maybe hyper realistic like a photo, but okay. Well, and like, you know, as I'm teaching, I always try to give you, you know, different tips of how you could make it more stylized versus more realistic and things like that too. So, but as far as colors today, or I'm using acrylic, but feel free if you want to be using watercolor, if you'd rather use gouache, if you'd rather use brush pens, like brush pens can be really great for this. So, I mean, really whatever you want to do is really fine. I'm going to walk through the process slightly different today than I have in the past. But just keep in mind, a lot of my process, I will sort of be referring to acrylic because that's what I'm using. But I'll try to give like extensions or kind of side notes if you're using a different material. Since, you know, Lee, for example, I know you're using watercolor today. Yeah. And so as far as colors, as always, I'm trying to keep it that you could do any of these paintings with just your 3 primaries and black and white. So that's what I have on hand, but some other colors that I think work really well for this particular painting. And I do have my printer, just that's the best I could get for my image today. I need to refill my ink. So colors are not so great. So one thing you could do is even have like the club homepage pulled up on your screen too, because the image is on there if you weren't able to print it out, and you know, if that works for you. Or I'll just kind of talk about colors too as I go. But some other colors I have that I think will work well is this yellow oxide color. It's kind of this darker, warmer yellow that just kind of brings some warmth into this particular scene. And keep in mind, you can always change colors too. I just tried to pull colors I actually saw in the image. And then 2 staple colors, if you don't have these colors kind of in your toolkit, I highly recommend a burnt umber and a burnt sienna. They're just some neutrals that kind of give you those nice kind of cool, neutral, and warm browns. And then I also have a Hooker's Green Hue Permanent here. And this is a really just pretty green. It's really kind of dreamy and goes really nicely with this particular painting. But again, if you didn't have this type of green, you could also add a little red into a brighter green to lower the saturation. So this is just kind of like a green with a lower saturation, which again kind of goes with the image. And what I'm going to do just really quickly, just so we can all see this, is I'm going to share that. Here's the image. So again, it's from unsplash.com. It's Daniel McCarthy's the photographer. So looking at this reference photo, you know, I kind of tried to pick something where we see a little bit of, you know, kind of foreground texture, some middle ground, some background. We've got the lighthouse. So as far as the lighthouse goes, this is kind of, you can stylize it, you can make it more realistic. I'll kind of talk about tips for both. These little thin black kind of lines you're seeing, if you're not comfortable with a skinny little paintbrush, you could always do like micron pen lines, or a really sharp, crisp colored pencil if you're doing watercolor can be really pretty. So just keep in mind, paintings can always turn mixed media as well. So I'm going to stop sharing that. So let's, there we go. So if you want to kind of get your sketch ready to go, if you haven't, and as far as like the lighthouse shape, you can even just kind of start with almost like a long rectangle that just kind of goes inward a little bit. And even some of these little lines you could add in later if you felt more comfortable doing that. Susan, were you able to sketch it all beforehand or no? No? That's okay. So kind of why you're taking a minute to sketch. And then as always, you know, you can tape it off or you don't have to tape it off. That's really up to you. I am just going to start putting some of my colors on my palette, my blue. And some white, because I'm going to be starting with the sky. Now, if you are using watercolor and you don't have any masking fluid or Frisket, just be mindful of the white or light areas of your paper. And that's okay, you can totally paint without Frisket and masking fluid, but like around kind of like in here, just you don't want a lot of color. And then even kind of down in here, up here, you just kind of want to keep it very loose, very washy with very light pigment there. And so what I'm going to do, we're not going to wash this entire thing like we have before. We're going to rather kind of work in sections at a time, because I'm wondering if it might just make it a little bit easier to break it down. Carol, how are you on your sketch? Were you able to sketch something out?
Yes, you can remove it if you'd like.
Okay.
I've got something down here.
Okay, perfect. Well, I just want to make sure Susan gets a little something on her paper.
Although I look at it, it looks pretty lopsided.
But you know, keep in mind that's okay. You know, a lot of my things I'll do in sketchbooks too. Sometimes it's, like I said before, it's about process, it's about learning, it's about building up skills to then try it again. So a lot of these things that we're doing in class, I think if you tried it again on your own, you'd see a lot of growth from the learning process. I
did that yesterday with that, oh, what was it, the sky?
Oh, did you? You worked on it some more?
Yeah, I did. I did a whole new one to see what I could come up with.
How did you feel about it?
I thought it improved a little, so I think if I just keep repeating things, it will improve.
Yeah, oh, that's so great, Carol. I'm so happy to hear that. Seeing even little bits of growth can be very rewarding, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, the more I practice, it'll improve.
It will, absolutely. That's how it goes.
Sorry, Jen, I lost my...
Oh, no, that's okay. How are you, Cheryl?
Um, I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
My paints all just fell.
Oh no.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I like have those mornings too, you know, it's like you just
Yeah, we all do.
we all do every little thing, you know?
Yeah.
But welcome. You're no problem.
Thank you.
We're prepping, getting ready to roll. Susan's doing a little sketch. Were you able to sketch anything or not yet?
Very lightly, but I
Okay.
did sketch.
Perfect. And I was saying too, light is fine. Light, loose sketch is great.
Okay. I had tomorrow's mixed up with today's, so.
You know, and then I noticed when they sent out the little newsletter, it said today was a drawing class, I think, unless I'm mixing it up. But then I double checked. I'm like, no, it's painting. It says painting. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a funny Saturday today.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We're here and we're ready to paint. It's good.
Oh, good.
And I think I've got all my camera issues solved now. So we're plugged in, we're hardwired.
Wonderful.
So I don't think we should have any issues.
I popped in at the beginning. You said we needed burnt umber, burnt sienna.
Yeah. So what I said, I do have just primaries in black and white, which you can totally do this entire painting with just those, but some extra colors that can be helpful just to achieve some of the pretty tones we see in this image. Could be burnt sienna and burnt umber. And then I also have a yellow oxide. Which can be really nice to just kind of warm things. But if you don't have a yellow oxide, another kind of warm yellow could work. If you don't have a warm yellow, that's okay. We can make orange. We can make it work. And then I also have, this is called Hooker's Green Hue Permanent. And it's kind of like a lower intensity green, but also kind of lighter. So it's almost like if you made green, put maybe a smidge of white with it, and then lowered the intensity with red. So you can make this on your own, but yeah, absolutely. Just some extra colors I have, but then, you know, as always, if you have other colors that you have in your little kit that you're like, oh, that would look really nice, pull them out. That's totally fine. And then, you know, too, I'll always tell you what style of paint I'm using ahead of time, like today's acrylic. But if you're like, yeah, I'd rather use watercolor, I'd rather use gouache, do whatever, you know, I think that's great.
Okay.
Cool. So to start, we're going to approach this a little bit differently. We're not going to do an entire wash over this entire painting. And the reason being is because even though washing a painting with acrylic is traditional, I want to show you other methods for doing things that you might enjoy more, because that's what art's about. It's about finding, you know, the way you like to do things. And so I'm just going to we're going to chunk it a little bit more rather than washing the whole entire thing. We're going to kind of focus a little bit more part by part. But with that being said, we'll still hop around a little bit because you just do that in art. So I have I should have cleaned my palette before I started today. It's a little tough to see some of my colors, but I have some white and some blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a little white and blue together to create kind of just a nice kind of sky blue. And then I'm going to mix a little water on my brush, and I'm going to start painting in kind of the upper area of my sky. I'm not going to come all the way down because I am going to kind of put some clouds here. But with acrylic, we can layer. But if you're doing watercolor, keep in mind, you are going to layer, but in a different way. So allow yourself more water as you pull it down, okay? So I'm going to start with my white, and, you know, feel free to ask questions as we're going. Feel free to, you know, alter colors from me a little bit. I keep my kind of loose with the image, just because, you know, I've mentioned that to you before, that I just like that freedom. So I'm just going to start up top kind of. there's more saturation, and then with some water, I can just sort of pull that down.
Ah,
And then, you know, I am going around my lighthouse because I'm not washing my entire thing. But if you get a little bit of paint in other areas, it's okay, because again, this is acrylic and you can layer it, no problem. I like the angled flats for this kind of stuff because you've got the advantage of doing big, large areas and pulls, but then you can use like the little areas. If I dip my brush in water, I can use the angle on its edge to kind of get in all these little nooks. And that way I have the advantage of using one single paintbrush for painting everything in this background, which can be really, really nice. So an angled flat, this is a size, this is 3/4 of an inch. So it can be, it's a nice size. I'm just kind of spreading this across the top. And again, I'm just using some water to then kind of pull this down. I'm going back and forth, back and forth. And just some more water pulling this down. And you can play around with your brush strokes here as you're starting to pull it down. Do you like seeing the strokes? Do you want to go back and forth and blend? And I'm going to stop about here because I'm going to start mixing in like a little yellowish kind of color there to kind of warm some of that. But I'm going to keep going on this side. And again, if I get like a little into the lighthouse, I'm not super worried. I'm going to be painting over that anyway. And you can play around like with your colors here too. You know, you can mix a little bit of yellow into your sky, or play around with how much white you're adding, or play around with different blue variations. I'm keeping mine just kind of simple right now. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is kind of over in this area. It's a little bit lighter. So just kind of with that same brush, I'm going to take a little bit more white paint into that blue. So a little bit more white, just kind of lightening that up. Still have some water in my brush. And then I'm just going to kind of bring in, just kind of letting my hand just kind of be a little flowy. It's maybe a good way to describe it. It's kind of loose. I'm just going to kind of blend in a little bit more of a lighter value of that blue. So when we look at the sky, it's never just one solid color at any given time. You know, depending on where the sun is or how clouds hit, we see variations. So this is a way to get a variation just by mixing in a little bit more white, a little bit more water, and then I'm just kind of blending that in. Sometimes I'll take my brush and kind of cross it back and forth like this. That's kind of a nice way to blend colors together a little bit. You're almost like cross hatching. And when you have a flat brush like the one I'm using, it just kind of blends it. But you could use any brush that you want, depending on the type of texture that you're trying to achieve. Mine's pretty smooth right now, but that's what I'm going for. So I like to build up my texture afterwards sometimes. I'm just adding a little bit more white now. I'm kind of doing the same thing, just to achieve another little kind of layer of light. Now, if you are using watercolor, I've mentioned this before too, you can still mix white gouache with it and kind of have a more modern approach to watercolor. That's totally fine. Even though that's not the traditional way to paint with watercolor, it doesn't mean you can't do it. I'm still just mixing in, blending in some of that lighter blue. And like, we don't have to finish our entire sky right now, but this is kind of a way I might kind of build in some color instead of doing a wash, just to kind of show you something different, a different approach that you might enjoy. I think that's what art is truly about, is finding that process that you love and that is fun for you and allows you to feel comfortable making creative choices, but then you feel like safe enough to try new things too, I feel like. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to make myself a light orange, like a really light orange. So I'm going to do some primary yellow, like a hint of primary red. And then some white. I feel like my white paint is the paint I always go through the fastest. I've got like a couple of these little bitty tubes I'm trying to use up before I break into my new bigger tubes. But yeah, it just goes so fast. I use so much of it. Okay. Do a little palette knife. Starting with a little white, and then I'm gonna just put in a little yellow into that white. And then I'm gonna put just a teensy tiny bit of red. And then I can start darkening that as I go. I just kind of like to mix little by little, have control of my color that way. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to use, I have a smaller angled flat that I'm going to use, but you could use a round, you could use a regular flat, you could use, you know, whatever paintbrush. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take even actually some extra white. I'll lighten this up even more. I'm going to take some white and then bring kind of those colors together. I want that really, really light to begin. I'd rather have it lighter first than darken it for this instance, just with that sky. So then as I kind of come toward the bottom here, I'm just going to start blending in some of this kind of lightish yellow color. And again, I like this angled flat because I can kind of paint in large areas, but like this little house that I put in here, a little building, it's easy to use those little angled edges around it. So what I'm going to do is sort of kind of block in these two colors next to each other, but then I'll come back and do a blend. If you're doing watercolor, you can just kind of do the wet on wet technique a little bit and allow them to naturally blend. But if you're doing acrylic, we'll come back and we'll blend it. So I'm just kind of blocking it in for now, putting this loose color in. Now, another thing you can do with washes too, just to kind of give you another suggestion, is you can do selective washes or controlled washes, whereas I could put like a wash of a color under this, then do this yellow on top if I wanted to pull more color into it. So again, just another variation of something you could do. I'm going to keep bringing this color around over here. And too, with references, if there's anything like you don't like in the reference photo or want to just not put it in there, I always say just don't draw it in or paint over it or something, because you know, this is your painting. You can change it from that reference photo. So I'm going to start mixing in some more white actually, because this gets pretty bright over here. So that was maybe a little too yellowy, but that's okay. I can blend in some white into that. And I just kind of like to move my paintbrush kind of back and forth, kind of changing directions as I'm going. And then I'm going to pull in some more white. Minute. I said so much white. Two, if you notice your paintbrush is pulling too much color in, every once in a while, you know, clean that paintbrush off. You can wipe it off on some paper towel. That can be really helpful. And then start pulling more of that color in there too. And just, you know, try different brush strokes, moving it back and forth. You could kind of swirl your brush around. If you notice an area is too dark, you can always let it dry and kind of come back in and add more color to it. So with some of these kind of white clouds in the sky, I'll kind of texture them and add more detail later, but just to kind of block them in, because again, we're still just blocking in right now. Keep in mind, it's still looking rough, it's still looking loose. We're gonna pull it all together. So what I can do here is just kind of start pulling in or swirling, almost kind of like the sky painting from the other day, kind of swirling in some of those kind of initial cloud shapes. And this is where you could pull a little bit more water into your brush so it gets transparent in areas, or perhaps in other areas you want more paint in your brush so it's more opaque. So this can be kind of fun because you just start to kind of create these shapes, and then as paint dries you can then layer more paint on top. You could also use a sponge to sort of lightly kind of stamp in some texture. That can work too. But, you know, to me, this is where the fun problem solving comes into play. Like, how do I want to interpret the texture I see in a photograph in my painting? What could I do? This is where I get to be creative. This is where I get to kind of almost, you know, you get to have people see what you want them to see, or the way you see things. And I think that's really fun. So, you know, have fun, be creative with it, try different brushes, try swirling paint, try tapping paint, try letting it dry, try layering it up. Sometimes I'll do like a partial dry, then tap more in versus completely dry. So it's just kind of all those little things you can do to try different things, you know, and it's a matter of getting to know your paint too, I think, and the material. Yeah, I'm just putting in a little bit more water, bring some into this side. Now, if you're doing watercolor or acrylic, I don't think anyone's painting with gouache today. You have the ability to glaze, and glazing is a beautiful thing. Glazing is where you take washes of color and you wash it over top of already dried paint. So what we can do now is we can sort of glaze and sort of blend these colors together a little bit. You can also glaze to kind of make areas slightly different, change the color just a little bit. But this is kind of what I'll start doing with skies then, is I'll just start to kind of glaze in different colors. And again, the beauty with acrylic is you can keep layering and layering and layering. It's okay if your paper triples, quadruples in weight at the end of it. It could, because the paint will hold, it will layer. So you can keep glazing colors on top of existing colors until you create the textures and the variations that are pleasing to you. So that's again, the really fun part. I think this is, to me, this is like the problem solving part, you know, that you got to figure out, how do I want this to look, or how could I achieve that texture? What brush might work best here? If I want it more opaque, you know, what should I do? And The trick to that's always white, keep in mind. White is your key to opacity, and water is your key to transparency. So just keep that in mind too. You know, and while you kind of got some of that yellowish color on your brush, you know, you could even kind of block in where that little sunbeam, I'm gonna make mine kind of extra yellow in the beginning, so that I can kind of pull in some lighter glazes on top of that later. And then, you know, what I might also do is at this point be like, okay, my sky's good for now. I'm going to leave it for now, and I'm going to go elsewhere in my painting, and then I can come back to this. So that's kind of what I meant by hopping around. We're kind of focusing on an area, kind of laying in some initial groundwork, blocking it in, and then we could hop elsewhere. So I'm going to just kind of now block in my ground, and then start kind of blocking in the lighthouse. And after we get the big areas blocked in, then we really just get to go in and texture and add all those little fun kind of finishing details. So I am going to use my Hooker's green that I have here. If you don't have a kind of darker-ish green by itself, you could mix your green with yellow and blue, and then put just a teensy tiny touch of red into it. Just a teensy tiny touch. And keep in mind that's gonna lower the intensity. Now, this yellow oxide color I have too, I'm gonna put a little bit of that on my palette because that can be kind of nice to bring in some of the mix with the green to kind of bring some of the warmth. If you don't have a darker yellow, you can make your own with yellow with a touch, teensy tiny touch of purple. And that's going to lower the intensity of a yellow. You could also put a touch of red in there to just warm the yellow if your yellow is like a lemon yellow and kind of cool. So just some kind of ways you can manipulate color a little bit if you need to do that. Let's see. And again, you can kind of start out washy and light. Sometimes, especially with when you look at something with so much texture like grass, it's a little overwhelming when you look at it initially. So I try to squint at it to get rid of as much texture as possible and only see like color and value. And then what I try to do is just kind of loosely, again, I might start lighter than normal because it's more washy in the beginning. And also I can control my colors. And I'm just going to kind of block in some ground. And again, keep it super loose at first. We'll build up that texture after. A bunch of, you know, when we're starting with painting, we want to do kind of those big kind of areas and blocks of color before we put in details, because we don't want to have to paint over our detailing. That can be frustrating. And I'll sometimes, if I'm blocking in loose like this, you know, there's no really certain recipe here. I just kind of look at the image, like I said, squint at it, and I'll just kind of use the colors I've got on my palette here, this green, this white, this yellow, and I'll just kind of go back and forth and just kind of, I'm almost using them together and just kind of mixing them. And it's like almost every time my paintbrush hits the paper, the color is slightly different. Rather than me just using the same color, because what that's going to do is it's going to help me create depth. Because when we look at a landscape, we're seeing space, but it's flat, right? So we want to create depth with more color, more variation. So just kind of, you know, let your eye hop around a little bit and look, where's it light, where's it dark, and just kind of block in your colors accordingly. If you need to darken your green at all, you can always put in a smidgen of red. You could do a little bit of black if you needed to, a little bit of like a navy blue color if you happen to have that on hand. But some of my initial darks, I don't even worry about right away. I almost focus on, you know, kind of a medium when I'm doing some grass like this, because then I can pop in lights and darks to give it that dimension I'm looking for. And, you know, grass texture, we'll talk about some different ways to kind of achieve grass texture. You know, it could be something where you're painting little strokes with an itty bitty brush, or it could be you're using kind of a bristly paintbrush and kind of doing some more loose textures. You know, it's really up to you. And, you know, if you look at, you know, my colors compared to the reference photo are definitely more saturated and, you know, I don't know if you want to say even a little bit more whimsical, but that's like my style of painting. So that's an example. When I'm painting, I always make it my own, always, because I think that's just important to do. And, you know, if you don't feel like you know what your style of painting is yet, don't worry, you'll figure it out. It just kind of will evolve. It just happens. You'll notice kind of tendencies and the things that I used to kind of not like about my artwork sometimes are the things I like the most now. So just, you know, what is your hand like to do? Like, what is your mind telling you to do when you're painting? You know, kind of listen to that, be in tune with it. The more you do that, the more I think you're going to develop like your style and the way you like to paint. So I just kind of am letting it overlap a little bit, because the more overlap I have, the more it's going to build up opacity. Now would be a good time to bring in just a little bit of those like burnt umbers if you've got some of those colors, or some browns. If you don't have any browns, you can make your own with the 3 primary colors in equal proportions. My favorite way is to mix a green and then add red to it. I think green and red are the easiest combinations for making brown. So if you need to make your own, I'm cleaning my brush off a little, but not like all the way, as to have a little bit of that green left in there. That can be another trick when you're painting to create unity. It doesn't work all the time. It's a selective kind of tool. But if you're painting an area like this ground where there's so much interaction of color and texture, letting your colors just sort of all mix together, excuse me, can be really kind of fun and interesting. Sometimes you don't want to do that because it creates mud, of course. So it's, you know, sometimes you want to do that, sometimes you don't. But I'm just going to go in and just kind of pop in loose, kind of where there's some dark areas. Again, when I'm blocking into, I don't worry if my colors are perfect. I never worry about that in a block in phase, because I'm going to be layering on top. It's just kind of that initial layer of color. However, if that is important to you, that's okay. You can take more time and spend thinking about your color combinations. You know, I just kind of like to explain to the differences in process and how people like to work, because it's so different, and I think that's really interesting. So again, I just try to blur my eyes out a little bit and just kind of tap in color where I see it. And then the more you build this up, you'll have an idea of what colors you'll need to add. You can also keep adding water in areas. Keep in mind, you can still be glazing to create different effects. Try your brush in different directions. So I'm going to bring just a teeny little bit of black into this too, just for this lower area. I just want to darken that up. So just some kind of things to keep in mind about color. Generally speaking, darker colors go back in space, and lighter colors tend to pop forward, but also cooler colors tend to recede and warmer colors tend to come forward. So just some things to think about when you're choosing colors and when you're thinking about value. But value is crucial for depth too. So, you know, as you're starting to build in these layers, you really do want to make sure you've got dark areas, light areas, and those tones in between. And you can build up the darks. It's not like they all have to be there right away. But as you're building this, you want to see those different values. And honestly, like I purposely picked like a lighthouse that was a little bit more landscapey, just so we had some more textures and things to paint in here. But I think landscapes are such a great way to learn how to paint, because you just have so many textures and so many colors to try to interpret. And I think that you just learn so much from it. And drawing too. That's why tomorrow, if you coming to our drawing class, we'll do a little mountain landscape, which the image is already on the blog if you want to check it out. But sometimes I think, you know, drawing a landscape first can help you paint it or understand how to paint better. So even if drawing isn't like your favorite thing, it can help. Or, you know, prepping for paintings. Now, keep in mind too, if you notice your colors are mixing too much, keep in mind wet paint on wet paint is going to blend, whereas wet paint on dry paint will leave more of a crisp edge. So it's okay to let areas dry and come back to them. It's okay to return to an area where you've worked. I'm going to tap in just a little bit more here, and then I think I'm going to be ready to kind of start working on the lighthouse. I also decided when we do our painting classes, I'm gonna need like 10 cups of water. It's amazing how fast that water gets muddy, isn't it? Okay, so I'm gonna do more of this green. Pop this in here. Lock it in. And the more you paint kind of this process, you'll learn kind of about blending, the illusion of blending, how wet paint will blend with wet paint, but then also how you could kind of scumble dry paint or wet paint on dry paint or glaze wet paint on dry paint. So there's all these like techniques and solutions for doing things that will get different results. So I think, you know, doing like little landscapes like this and just trying them can be really fun. Or how like Lee today did 2 different landscapes, or, you know, 2 of the same, I should say, but that can be really fun too, to just try different things. So I'm going to grab just a little bit of black. There's kind of, it's a little tricky to see, but this is like a fence in the background. It's like a brick, or like a brick wall, I guess you could say. So I'm just going to kind of put in, using an angled flat, and I'm just putting in kind of that, a dark color, kind of blocking that in. And I'll kind of think about texture for that after the fact. But at least I can kind of make it all one color to begin with. Especially because it's pretty little. Just mixing in a little bit of water on your paintbrush too can help the paint flow a little bit more. Especially when you're trying to create kind of lines or edges.
Oh, how ugly.
So how's everyone doing so far? How you feeling? Is there kind of any problem solving? Any
big problem? This is the watercolor. There. This is the watercolor paper that came with my cheapy paint set, and it's the worst watercolor paper on earth. It's way too absorbent. So I'm just trying to make it work, and that's watercolor, and now I'm adding watercolor pencil. But if it's just going to soak up everything in blur, I thought, okay, go with it.
I go with it. Yep. That's what I would do too. I was pretty dreamy though. I'm liking your like mark making and kind of like texture and layering. I think that's really nice.
Yeah. So yeah, making something of nothing.
Well, you know, and actually Karen and I from Creative Crafting were chatting yesterday, and we were both talking about how watercolor paper is way more important than the paint. Like the paper is the most important thing when it comes to like watercolor painting, because you know, of all those properties and it absorbing correctly. So we both said we'd rather have expensive watercolor paper with a set of Crayola watercolors than cheapy watercolor paper with the nicest set of watercolors. So, but you know, I like what you're doing. I think that it's going to be a fun little piece when you're done with it. You're really expressive.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to kind of tap in. Now, one thing I'll mention with the trees, you do see some sky behind the tree, right? Because it's not totally full. So one kind of solution would be to take a little kind of wash of your sky color. It can even be lighter than that. Just keep it super duper light and just kind of lightly put that over top of the whole tree, and then you can tap in green on top of that when it dries. So it'll just kind of look like you have maybe a blue, a little blue yellowy bush for a minute, but then you can tap in all the green around it, but then you've got the background that shows through and you don't have to paint in between. So that's just kind of one little thing I do if you want to try that. And then let's see, Lighthouse. I'm gonna keep the nice red. I like the red. I think it's pretty against the sky. Seeing that pop of red. I'm gonna bring just a touch of green into the red though to lower the intensity, because my primary red, it's almost a little pinky. So just a little touch of green will just darken that up for me a little bit. And then the Lighthouse will probably require a few coats here. So initially, I just don't even worry about the lights and the darks, but I'm just kind of taking this color. I don't like this paintbrush at all. Here we go. That's the one I wanted. There we go. So yeah, you'll have to probably do like a few coats. So that initial one, I just kind of keep it loose, like a general medium value of the color, and then I can block in or blend in or glaze in, or however you're choosing to paint some of the values. But just getting kind of an initial base color to begin, especially because we didn't wash our entire painting. And I'm using this small flat I have, which is really nice for painting in areas and shapes like this lighthouse. And just keep in mind, you know, if you're having any issues, you know, just a troubleshooting thing, sometimes it's the brush you're using. So like I just started using a brush and I was like, oh, that's not the brush I wanted for this. So if, you know, try different brushes. That's why it's nice to have a variety in different sizes and different shapes. But this little, they call it a shader, but it's a flat. It's a size 8 from the Royal and Land Nickel, and it's awesome for this kind of stuff, because you can get that flat application of color. You can get in little edges. I'm also going to go ahead and just like paint in this little building in the background. I did choose to put that in, you know, and I did mention at the start, you don't have to put in everything in a reference. Like if there's something you don't like, or you're like, I don't really want to paint that, or if you want to add something, you can always do that. That's part of making it your own. And I often just use reference photos too, just, you know, composition, kind of basic subject matter. Just put a little bit of water in my brush will help me get those little edges. There we go. And there's like a little kind of white outlining on the house, but I would do that after. So I'm just gonna go ahead and let the whole thing. Let's see. Oh, I hear something in the background.
I think that's my clock. I'll turn off the mute.
Oh no, it's nice, cute. Is it like a little cuckoo clock? And
It's
then,
just
you know, for
a bird clock.
a little bird
Excuse
clock. Oh,
me.
that's fun. No,
Yeah.
you're fine. That's fun. Now from here, you can just kind of block in any and fill in any other little empty areas that you might have missed. I usually, you know, I usually don't miss so many, but it's like such a different experience, you know, painting for a demonstration versus painting on my own. I think I've said that before, but you know, you're just considering other factors, right? Of making sure people are with you and all that. So I'm just going to tap in a little bit of blue kind of back here, not worrying if it overlaps a little bit on the black, because I can just cover that up. That's no problem. Or if you don't want that to happen, you can grab a little skinny brush. Then I'm just going to make kind of like a gray, kind of like a wash of black more so, and just kind of fill in. Actually, a little round would be good. So like circular shapes, I like to use round paint brushes because they naturally kind of follow the contour and the curve, versus my edges. I like that flat brush better. Fill this in. And some of the kind of like lightness and brightness of the sky, we can pull kind of that more in with more glazing, just to kind of as an FYI. I mean, we still have some time, but I do want to mention that. We'll kind of head in that direction in a minute. I do have a little bit more blue I need to kind of tap in here. And then I'm going to do like a little, might exaggerate this a little bit, but make the inside that kind of lightish yellow, because then it's pulling this. It's a little tricky to see. It's kind of far away. I'll lift it a little bit. But I did just like a little bit of yellow up here, the same kind of yellow that I used down in here and over in here, just to create balance. It's just kind of something I like to do. Repeat my colors, try to use them at least, you know, maybe 2 or 3 areas. Again, that just creates unity, makes it look like it belongs together. It's all part of the same. So really quickly, I do want to go back, and this is dry now, so I can kind of tap in some tree color. I'm going to mix up some more green. We do kind of some green and black. You can tell the trees are green, but they're almost kind of silhouette because they're backlit with the sun behind it. So when the sun is behind something, it's being backlit, and that's how we often will get the silhouette effect. So with the tree, I'm just gonna kind of start by kind of doing some swirls and kind of taps of some greens. They're a little bit more washy to begin with because I'm going to build up texture as I go, because I don't want the full tree to be like super duper solid. I personally am not worrying about it being identical to what's on the image because, you know, I'm just kind of going with it. But if you want to be more specific, you could, you know, spend a couple minutes and look at the shapes that you're seeing. You can also kind of use a thin liner brush or a flat on its edge and kind of pull up some like little lines like this on the bottom, just to kind of almost get some of the tree trunks that we're seeing a little bit there. And then you can kind of build up that color around it. So again, it's just interpretation of the texture. How do you want to interpret it? What do you like the look of? And to me, this is, you know, what I refer to as stylizing, because it's based on reality. When this is done, you'll be able to tell it's a little landscape image with a lighthouse, but it's not going to be identical to my reference image. It's not hyper realistic. It's not totally like the image. But again, I talked about images as, you know, starting points. I have, however, like I've taken some of my own reference images before, and I'll like make those more true to the image because I feel like it was my photo I've taken. Whereas I feel like sometimes, you know, when I'm using someone else's reference image, I think changing it just seems like the right thing to do, or, you know, making it my own. However, using images from like Unsplash, they want you to use them for creating. That's the whole purpose of the website. So that's why I like pulling from that website in particular. And, you know, you can decide how much of the kind of sun do you want to, or the light do you want to see through. And you can tap more blue on top of the green to kind of bring some of that back in. And I kind of go around the sun a little bit. And then what I'll do is just kind of let areas dry, and then I'll come back in with more color. And then I'll tap in more color in certain areas to just kind of intensify it and build it up. And then I kind of start that process with everything on the painting, as I just start to go around and like down here, for example. And I love like what Susan held up with her. She had some very beautiful kind of line work, linear kind of lines. So like these little liner brushes can be really beautiful for that. If you don't have a liner brush, skinny brush or a flat brush on its tip can be really nice. But you could even just kind of start creating like texture and lines in different colors to kind of start mimicking grass. You can glaze in different colors if you need to change some of those properties. But I'll just kind of start building up some line work. And it's, you know, it's really subtle. I'll do some and then I can hold it up to the screen so you can see. Sometimes those little details are tricky to pick up. But to me, I love this part of painting. The blocking in is fun. It's like, it's the framework, it's loose, it's quick. But this is the kind of detailing I like, because I feel like it's not so tedious because I get to decide and I get to make it up, versus trying to match something to a photo exactly. So that's just kind of my personal take on it, what I like. But, you know, play around with different colors. You can let areas dry, then layer more on top. So I'll just kind of hold that up so you can see. But I just did some like little lines. I'd let this dry, then maybe put some lighter lines on top of this and just start to build up texture on top of this loose blocking that I've done. So everything you're seeing right now is a loose blocking in my eyes. Now I will texture, now I will detail. And for me, I've mentioned this multiple times, but I'm a little bit of a slower painter, and that's just because I like to take my time and think about texture and look at different areas and decide how I'm going to interpret it. And that's just the fun part for me. And some people paint a lot faster and they're quicker and they do multiple little studies. And I will say the more you paint, the faster you will get, though. That just kind of comes with it. But if you're a fast painter, be a fast painter. If you're a slow painter, be a slow painter. You know, it's like, I think it's fun because you can really embrace the type of painter you are, no matter what the subject matter is, no matter what the style is. Be really fun. So what I'm doing now is just, let me grab some more white actually. I am just still working down in here, and I'm going to just kind of hop around to different areas and pull in texture, pull in different values to just try to mimic as much of that as I can, or, you know, my own interpretation of it. And, you know, you can glaze or you can mix white with things. Combination of both just to create different textures can be really lovely. And you've got kind of the softness in areas. Glazing in colors like kind of a warmer yellow can make things look like they're glowing a little bit, or like a little yellow and white with washes of water. Neon paint isn't something I've gotten into very much, but I'd kind of like to try some. I've done like some metallic paints, which are really fun, but I would love to bring in some neon paint to just kind of see some of the different effects I could get. Or if you're mixing a neon paint with like a regular paint and some of the different things to just kind of create some of the glowing and some of the effects that you see in landscapes with light. I'm just taking a little bit of white and just kind of adding a little bit of detail back here. And then I did not put the only area where there's like no paint on mine, I didn't do this down here, and I didn't do these white areas. And then I just noticed I missed this white strip. I painted it red. Now, white is typically rarely ever just white. So keep that in mind. White typically is going to take on like a cool tone or a warm tone, depending on what it's around. So I'll mix like a little bit of, you know, maybe like a light yellow with my white, or even a teensy tiny bit of red. I'm just gonna paint, I'm gonna do kind of like a gray wash down here at the bottom for now for this. So let's see, get some white. Brush. So I'm going to do white, or, you know, you can even do just a touch of black and do like a gray. And then you can think about how in the middle, it's the lightest. And then on either side, black, it's a little bit darker. So I'll just kind of tap in, or you can kind of glaze in a little bit of gray on either side. And so it's lighter in the middle. And this, if you think about like a cylinder, helps create some of the illusion that that lighthouse is, you know, rounded and curved. I'll just kind of hold that up a little bit so you can see. And then what I can do is just take my brush and just pull and pull. And then I can always bring in just a little bit more white if I need to. And you might need to clean your brush off in between. Sometimes that's when we mix our colors too much or things get muddy. You just need to clean your brush off. There we go. And then you can, again, it helps just kind of create that illusion that we've got that curve starting to come together. So I'll go ahead and do that same little process on all of them. I'm not saying, you know, I'm done with that area, but you know, I don't have any paint there yet on mine. So that would be kind of how I would approach that for a block in. Again, bring a little gray on the edges. Kind of blend that in. I grew up in Michigan, right by Lake Michigan, and we always had really fun lighthouses in my hometown. So I've always really loved lighthouses. And then I've got to, you know, when I visited Maine and got to see lighthouses out there, and New Hampshire there, I just think lighthouses are really neat. And then I missed this strip up at the top. I just painted over it, so I'm just gonna add it in. This will probably need a couple coats just because I see that red underneath it, but that's okay. Sometimes that's another kind of cool effect. It's just different paint on top of paint versus painting in your little sections. So that can be a different way to just achieve different effects. And so what I need is like a little bit of using a pencil just to kind of shape that a little bit. Help it match the other ones a little bit more. So it looks like I did it intentionally. I'm also going to take, if you look at the, on the left side of your lighthouse, because the sun is coming from here, there's going to be a little bit of reflected light on the side of your lighthouse. So I actually just take my paintbrush with a little bit of white, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of white on the side of the lighthouse here. Now, if you're doing watercolor or something, or you can't do this, that's okay. There we go. So this is pretty much, again, to me, when I look at this now, I've got paint over the entire thing. This is like a full block in for me. So now, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but this is where I'm texturing, I'm detailing, I'm working on this till I decide it's done and I'm happy with it. And that might be, you know, 20 more minutes, or it might be a couple more hours. You know, it's just, it kind of depends on the painting for me, how long it takes. And I just kind of let the painting tell me, you know, like, oh, it's done now. And I usually just know when I'm finished with something, but sometimes I'll even take something like this and put it away for the day and come back another day and add to it and work on it in phases, because sometimes you just get different fresh ideas. but I'll just kind of allow myself to use some of the paint that's already on my palette, and I'll just kind of go in and, you know, you could call even some of this refining, like, do you have all the information that you want from your reference photo? Are you missing anything? Is a color out of place? Do you need to fix it? So that's kind of what I start doing. I'm just kind of glazing right now, just to kind of, even over top of my green here, just to kind of bring some of that warmth. So glazing can be a great way to show kind of like sunbeams or warmth or certain times of day. And you can, again, just glaze over top of the entire thing if you're doing watercolor or acrylic. You can't do that with gouache though. And you know, some of this you can't really see on my screen, but on my own eye, it's like looking really nice and warm. You know, it's like sometimes things change when they dry too, so you never know. I also have, so I got this really cool paintbrush from Michaels, and it's a mixed media brush, Princeton, and it's really bristly and kind of rough and textured. This brush I love for like trees. You can almost kind of stipple with it. And just kind of like, this is a fun way to kind of build up texture. Just kind of tap it in. I just think of all these different ways. How could I make it look like this? Or, you know, do I like how this is looking? If I don't, what could I do to change it? And, you know, I'll set some, one thing I'll talk about too is going into a painting. I think it's good to set some intentions or some goals, but I also think it's really good to go in with a very open mind and kind of let the painting evolve and unfold how it's going to. So, you know, just some things I think about, because I think when I started painting a lot, I would have all these grand ideas in my head. When it didn't turn out exactly the way I wanted, I got frustrated. And part of that was, you know, I wouldn't know how to do something, or, you know, how do I make it look like that? Or how do I achieve that texture? So I think when you kind of come in with a more open mindset, like I'm going to have a reference image, I'm going to paint a lighthouse landscape today, but I don't know what style it's going to necessarily be. I'm going to, you know, kind of start the process. I know I need to block in, but then what happens next? What types of textures do I want to use? So keep in mind, the more skills you start to develop, the more tools you kind of have in your toolkit, and the more you're going to be able to create specific styles or types of painting. And when you allow yourself to just experiment, I think you just learn so much that way. You can also, you know, something I like to do as well, if I'm unsure about a color or a color scheme, I'll do little swatches ahead of time too, and just kind of think, you know, what colors do I want to use? You can also give yourself a limited color palette if you feel like you're overwhelmed by choice or you're not sure what color to use. The act of only using primaries and attempting to mix all your own colors will teach you a lot. So just little, you know, little tips, tricks, challenges, depending on, you know, where you want to grow as an individual. And I'm just kind of, I'm almost like glaze kind of scratching with this brush right now with kind of a light, kind of tannish white, just kind of blocking in some more of where these highlights are kind of falling. So a lot of times I like to paint very loose And then I refine as I go. And so my last layer is all those little tiny brushes and little textures and little details. Sun in here. And like in my trees, I think when that dries, I'm going to tap in a little bit more sky color in there just to kind of see some poking through. So you can go subtractive too. Keep that in mind. You can paint things back in if you've gotten rid of something on accident or you don't like how it looks. I tapped in a little bit of red, kind of in yellow, just to kind of achieve some of those kind of warm kind of sun tones that we see in here. I'm just kind of glazing and painting that into some of these areas here. There we go. Cool. And yeah, I think that's dry enough. I might tap a little bit more blue. Make some of that sky blue. Kind of tap some in. Give the illusion that's kind of poking through a little bit more. Not so full. So sometimes that's a nice texture for trees, more abstract trees, like you're going in a reverse, kind of letting that sky poke back through. Watercolor, it's a little trickier to do that, of course, but with acrylic. So one question too I had for you to think about, and you can kind of answer when we share in a few minutes if you want to share yours, is if you'd be interested in like some evening classes, not like super late or anything, but you know, a little bit later as I kind of shifting to going back to school, kind of some painting and drawing kind of in the evening. So think about if that would be of interest to you. I thought it might be kind of a relaxing thing to do. But we've got about like 6 minutes left, so I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of I think stop on mine for now because I'm just very curious to hear from you all and what you're thinking, how you're feeling about things. And then I think I'm liking mine, to be honest with you. I like how it's coming out so far. So I think I definitely want to spend some more time on it and just kind of build up some of the texture. But I'm liking some of the kind of warmness that's starting to come into here. I think that's kind of pretty. I'll probably blend in some lighter tones more into the sky to kind of finish that out. And then I'll probably kind of pop some of the darks in here just to make that a little bit more dramatic. Maybe add a little bit more blending and texture on my lighthouse. But yeah, I mean, it's looking pretty close. I'm feeling pretty good about it.